Have you ever wondered what sort of changes that you'd need to make to your programming, depending on whether you're in an off season or you have a competition coming up, or maybe you've just finished a competition? Today I'm going to go through a couple of my different clients' programming. It's a check-in day where I'm going to go through everything that we've done for the last 2 weeks, and I'm going to plot out everything that we're going to do for the next 2 weeks. However, this is always considered in the context of the overall plan, so I'm going to run through some of the programming for 3 of my clients today. I'm going to talk about where they're at in the training cycle throughout the year, what sort of competitions that they've just finished or they might have coming up, and I'm going to run through a lot of the programming and the changes that I'm going to make based on the fact that we might have a competition coming up, or we might be going into an off season, and then they might have different things coming up in their lives, and we're going to see how the programming changes to adapt for that. Alright, so yeah, this is Giovanni's programming. So my client Giovanni, he's just come off competing at Nogi Euros there only a few weeks back, and we're going into a bit of an extended off season here. So when we're going into a bit of an extended off season, we're going to be looking at trying to maximize the opportunity to put in really big blocks of work. Oftentimes when it comes to training jiu-jitsu athletes, they're going to have really dense competition cycles. So you're going to have competitions pretty frequently, often every month. Yeah, some of them are bigger competitions and some of them are smaller competitions, and for some of them you're going to like really adapt the training and peak for those competitions, and some competitions we're almost just going to ignore in a programming context, and we're just going to take them as extra rounds on the weekend, pretty intense extra rounds on the weekend. But outside of that, if we get a really good off-season block, what we really want to do is we want to maximize that by taking advantage of laying out big concurrent training blocks where we can stack some hypertrophy work, some general strength work, progress that into some maximal strength work, and really drive neural change and adaptation in the athlete as max strength work and really pushing for higher numbers on the bar and getting stronger is one of the best things you could be doing with your time. We're also, for Giovanni this time, we're going to start to intro a little bit more conditioning work. So it's not something that we've done a huge amount of in the past. Giovanni trains a lot of jiu-jitsu, so we feel like he was getting plenty of conditioning in that sense. However, we're going to go ahead and intro a little bit more bike work now for Giovanni, and we're just going to tack that onto the end of his sessions to make that nice and efficient in how he gets it done. And then on top of that, we're looking to maintain his current weight class. We're not looking to put any extra weight on. We want to try and maintain the current weight class here and be able to increase our output so be stronger, more powerful, more dynamic at the same weight. And then we just have some key lifts here, some movements that we've been working on over the last couple of weeks. Now we want to be selective with our key lifts because like we want to select movements that we're either going to now have an opportunity to work on and get better at, or we can take movements that we've already done a bit of work on in the past, and as a result we're going to get a really nice return on these big concurrent training blocks that we're laying out. We've also got some accessory lifts in there and just some things that I think Giovanni could benefit from coming forward in the next couple of weeks. Okay, so we had only just made changes to some of the plyometrics with the continuous jumps, so we're going to keep a lot of that in there, and then we have our general strength lifts here. So if we're in a general strength block where we're trying to look to get the athlete a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger, we're going to be operating in this kind of 8 to 12 rep range, and yeah, it's just really a point of preference as long as we're bringing the athlete to failure and bringing the athlete with some really nice training loads around 75-80% intensity, 75-80% RPE. That's going to be really nice. Pull-ups, we're going to do some pull-ups. I really like pull-ups low reps, so we're going to do some of that. And then we've just got some accessory work that we've been working on in the past. Yeah, some more stuff here. So same thing with the RDLs. We had to adjust some of this weight, so it'd be interesting to see for me now today with Giovanni. I haven't seen it yet, how he did with these adjustments in weight. When we initially introduce a training block, there's always going to be a little bit of variance in whether we've hit the mark correctly in terms of putting the weight down on the page, but don't worry about that. Like you don't have a crystal ball, you know, you're not supposed to absolutely nail it to the kilo. It's just to be take a really good educated guess and to hit as close to the bullseye as you possibly can, and then between you and athlete feedback then in the first week or two, you're going to very quickly figure out where you are. So you can see some of Giovanni's movements there, and then that's effectively the block that we're going to do for him. So we just took a look there at my client Giovanni. So that's going to be him set up for his off-season block now. We'll see a transition in what we do at about the 6-week mark, but for now we really just want to put some nice concurrent weeks of training together. Whenever we're looking for any sort of strength progression, consistency is really important, so that's the main thing that we're going to be looking for from him over the next couple of weeks and towards the end of the year. So next we're going to take a look at my client Jeffrey. There's two reasons that I wanted to bring him up. One, he actually has a competition this weekend, so I'm going to talk about what we've done to change the training around for this week. And then the other thing is, that's a smaller competition that we have been prepping for a much bigger competition that is on the 30th of this month. So we've just over 2 weeks to go on that. So we're going to take a look at Jeffrey's programming, and we're going to have a look at how it's changed for the immediate competition now and then the one at the end of the month. Okay, so here we have my client Jeffrey, and the reason that I wanted to talk about Jeffrey is because he has a competition this weekend. So what do we do when we have a competition, you know, now? And this would normally be our training week, so I wanted to show you this here. You can see that effectively Jeffrey would have a normal 3 days a week of training. However, what we do is when he has a competition like he has this weekend, what we're going to do is we're not going to train so much throughout the week. These were effectively put in as optional sessions. And Jeffrey had the option of whether he wanted to kind of complete these or not, but because we had some back issues approaching the competition, he erred on the side of not getting these done, which I'm really happy to see, and I think that was definitely the right call. When it comes to assessing whether you're going to be good to go on the competition day or not, there's nothing wrong with taking it slightly easier in the week previous, particularly with your strength and conditioning, and you should really just be doing jiu-jitsu on the week of competition. So I'm excited to see how Jeffrey gets on with his competition, but he's done a really good job of reducing the training volume in the week beforehand, and as a result of that, he's going to be going into this weekend feeling really fresh. Now we're going to take a look at something else, which is the competition that Jeffrey is preparing for at the end of the month. So here we have it. This is the competition that Jeffrey's preparing for now at the end of the month, which is going to be the IBJJF Asia Pacific on November 30th. So we've been prepping for this all the way back since September. I've been training Jeffrey for over a year at this stage. We did an initial 2-week general prep and pattern prep before we got into our bigger general strength progressing to max strength block, and then we had our speed power progression, and then the actual competition itself. We are currently in this peak block at the moment. Like I said, we've just taken a little break from training in the previous week because there's another competition going on. When it comes to the keynotes for this, we were really looking to just continue to always build our strength and our general capacity through the key patterns. We always want to be laying further and further groundwork for the future. So if we're getting stronger through our key patterns and we're building proficiency and we're building capacity in those key patterns, well then we're laying really good groundwork over time, and over time we're going to be better and better at our training, and we're going to be able to get more and more from our strength and conditioning, and probably have to do less and less to get more. And then there's some notes I feel like in the difference with gi and no gi. I feel like in the gi, you can put a little bit more preference on isometric strength, a lot more pulling movements, and biasing the training a little bit more towards this isometric nature of things, or to have more of a pull focus and pull dominance with the upper body volume. However, when it comes to no-gi, I feel like no-gi is a lot more dynamic, and as a consequence of that, there's definitely a capacity to have the athlete develop a little bit more speed and agility, and potentially have these style drills in the training, or looking at more plyometric complexes and these sort of things. And I think there's definitely some merit to separating these ideas within the training a little bit. And then we just have some general principles here that we're obviously going to deload the athlete as the competition approaches, and we're going to look to swap over to movements that allow us to develop a greater peak force, express a greater peak force, I guess. And then we have some of our movement progressions here that we would do. We would often take a bench and convert that to a throw. Same thing with our squat, and same thing with our pull-ups. It's one thing I've changed in the past. I wouldn't necessarily have done many speed-based row movements. It's not necessarily something that you see a lot of, but ever since moving into a sport where we do a huge amount of pulling as an upper body dominance within the sport, I think it was definitely merit to introduce some speed rows as a progression, and that's something that I do with a lot of the athletes as we peak them into the competitions. And then like that with the accessory lifts, it often just depends on the athlete themselves, and then my point of preference as to what I feel that they could kind of develop in this particular block. Okay, so that was my client Jeffrey, and like I said, he has a competition coming up, so we'll see how he gets on with that. The next client that we're going to take a look at, Porrick, also has a competition coming up. Okay, and for this one we have my client Porrick, who's in New Zealand, and he has a competition very soon, ADCC New Zealand, on November the 22nd. So like that, similar to Jeffrey, we've been preparing for this competition now since September, and we're nearly there. We're nearly at competition time. And similarly, Porrick, like Jeffrey, is currently in his peak phase for the competition. We're going to see some pretty similar notes for both Porrick and Jeffrey, with the major distinction being that Porrick needed to develop a lot of hamstring strength, and that's something that we've been taking an active role in trying to do. So hamstring strength is something that Porrick has struggled with for a while, and as a consequence of that, it was something that we really wanted to address, as we felt like it was a big limitation in his training. We've been addressing it, and I'm going to talk about some of the ways that we've addressed it and some of the movements that we've used to do that. And overall, the movements are looking much better, and we're starting to see a big increase in hamstring strength. The other key difference between his training and Jeffrey's is Porrick likes to develop a little bit of overhead strength, so we had a little bit of work in there as well. Personally, I'm a big fan of developing overhead strength and overhead movements with Jiu-Jitsu athletes, so I'm a big fan of having those movements in there, particularly if the athlete enjoys them, and then we can progress those movements and develop some strength in those regions, in those patterns. And then you'll see another difference here with some of the accessory lifts. We're going to see a slightly more bias towards some movements that prioritize the hamstring and the glute. And then I would have some notes here around the hamstring strength. When we're trying to develop strength in any tissue, we really want to attack it from a variety of angles. So we want to perform isometric movements. We want to perform movements that take the muscle through a contractile range as well as isometrics. What we also want to do is we want to, particularly in the case of the hamstring, we want to develop strength in both hip flexion and hip extension, so we can hit the different fibers and different muscles of the hamstrings, and we want to hit it in shortened and in lengthened positions. And taking any muscle group and hitting it through a myriad of different avenues like this is always going to be the best way to develop strength. Particularly when it comes to Jiu-Jitsu, and you're not only going to have to develop strength, but you're also more than likely going to have to put that soft tissue or that limb and joint structure through some pretty funky positions as a result of Jiu-Jitsu as well. So this is where it can be really advantageous to do both isometric work, training in the shortened position, training in the lengthened position, and once again introducing a wide different range of training options to the target muscle group or target joint area. So initially, when we started off trying to build the hamstring strength, we wanted to address it in a shortened position and in a lengthened position. So the first two things that we would have done was introduce plenty of RDLs and introduce this movement, the single leg hip thrust on bench. This is one of my favorite movements, and I really like this because it sequences a nice hip extension. It gets the athlete or individual really aware of their glute and hamstring in the shortened position. It teaches them how to load into their heel to look for contraction through their hamstring and their glute. And oftentimes it's a movement that people haven't done, so it's a bit of a novel training experience. That's always really good as well. We'll often do this in tandem with the RDLs, and once we had developed strength in these two movements, then we'll introduce a little bit more variety. Some of the variety that we then went on to introduce only recently was the Nordic hamstring curl. Anyone that's done Nordic hamstring curls properly before knows that they are seriously difficult movement, and that if you can develop strength in the Nordic hamstring curl, you're going to develop really strong hamstrings. In fact, there's been research done in the past that shows that the Nordic hamstring curl is one of the best exercises that you could do to safeguard your hamstrings against injury. So I'm a big fan of this movement. It builds a lot of strength in the hamstrings in hip extension, which is a really challenging way to build strength in the hamstrings, and also develops a lot of strength in the way the hamstring in the back of the knee and all of this tendon interacts with the knee structure. I found that if we can get athletes into this position, this is a really nice movement. Alongside that, I really like hamstring slider curls. I just don't have any footage of Porrick doing those because we haven't introduced that movement yet. Alright, well that was some of the programming that some of my athletes are doing at the moment in preparation for the competitions that they have coming up. Hopefully that was interesting, a little bit more in depth and a little bit more of an insight into what happens with the coaching and what happens with people's programming and how we can actually adjust things as competitions present themselves, or if there are no competitions on the horizon, how we can take a much longer off-season look and approach to things, and hopefully you got some insight into that there. If you liked the video and you like Jiu Jitsu S&C but you don't really know where to start, I'm going to link below a program that you can go ahead and get. If you put your email address in there, it'll send over. It's a really good start. There's links to YouTube videos that explain all of the exercises. There's even some explanations on the program in just a general sense. So if you wanted to do something and you wanted to get stuck into a bit of training immediately, you can go there. It's completely free and it's going to be really good. It's more than likely going to be a lot better than anything else that you're going to get out there that you even have to pay money for. So I guarantee you're really going to like it. Go to the link below, add your email address in there, and catch you on the next video.